The prosecutor's inheritance. Impact. The courtroom fell silent when District Attorney Haley Morrison walked through the double doors. Not the usual silence, the respectful hush that accompanies authority. This was different. This was the silence of recognition, of worlds colliding, of a cosmic joke so cruel that even the court stenographer's fingers froze above her keys. Haley's heels clicked against the marble floor. She wore her standard trial uniform, charcoal suit, white blouse, hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. Her leather briefcase, the one her grandfather had given her when she passed the bar, hung heavy in her right hand. She didn't look at the plaintiff's table. She didn't need to. She could feel her mother's stare like heat from a furnace, could sense her father's bulk shifting in his chair, the old athlete's frame gone soft with decades of self-indulgence. Judge Patricia Caldwell looked up from the docket, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Their eyes met. Haley saw the moment of recognition, watched understanding bloom across the judge's weathered face, followed immediately by something that looked like pity. Haley hated pity. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. "I'm here to observe the Morrison estate case. As a representative of the district attorney's office, we have an interest in ensuring that inheritance law is properly applied, particularly in cases involving potential elder exploitation." It was technically true. The DA's office had taken an interest. What Haley didn't say, what she didn't need to say, was that she'd specifically requested assignment to this case. Her mother stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "What is this? What is she doing here?" Sarah Morrison, 52 years old, still beautiful in that carefully maintained way that required expensive creams, regular Botox, and a personal trainer. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Haley's monthly rent. Haley finally allowed herself to look. 28 years. That's how long it had been since her mother had held her. 3 months old, and Sarah Morrison had placed her infant daughter in a car seat, driven her to her parents' house in Portland, and walked away. "She's a prosecutor?" Haley's father, Marcus Compson, though he'd never legally given her his name, leaned forward, his face reddening. "Nobody told us she was a goddamn prosecutor." "Language, Mr. Thompson." Judge Caldwell's voice cut through the room like a blade. "And Miss Morrison is correct. The district attorney's office does have standing to observe inheritance proceedings, particularly when there are allegations of undue influence or exploitation of the elderly." Haley set her briefcase on the defense table next to her grandfather's attorney, David Chen. David was 60, had known her grandfather for 40 years, and had held Haley when she cried at the funeral 6 months ago. He leaned close. "Are you sure about this?" Completely. She wasn't sure at all. Truth. The thing about abandonment is that it happens over and over again. It's not a single moment, a clean break, a door closing. It happens when you're 5 and every other kid at kindergarten has parents who show up for the Christmas pageant. And you have your grandparents, who love you fiercely, but whose backs hurt from sitting in tiny chairs. It happens when you're 10 and you have to explain why your emergency contact form lists grandmother and grandfather and nothing else. It happens when you're 13 and your body starts changing and you have questions that your grandmother answers with patient kindness, but you can't help wondering what it would be like to ask your mother. It happens when you're 16 and your grandfather teaches you to drive in his old Buick, and you love him for it, but there's still that hollow space where a father should be. Haley had stopped thinking about it most days. She'd built a life, a career, an identity that had nothing to do with Sarah Morrison or Marcus Thompson. She was Haley Chen Morrison. She'd added Chen to her name when she was 21, after her grandmother died, because someone needed to carry that name forward. Her grandfather had cried when she told him. Now he was gone too, and all that was left was this: a courtroom, a will, and 2 people who wanted what he left behind. Judge Caldwell called the court to order. We're here regarding the estate of Robert Morrison, deceased, who passed on March 14th of this year. The plaintiffs, Sarah Morrison and Marcus Thompson, are contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and mental incapacity. Mr. Chen, you're representing the estate? David stood. Yes, Your Honor. And I should note for the record that the primary beneficiary, Haley Chen Morrison, is present in court today. Sarah's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vance, spoke up immediately. Your Honor, we object to Miss Morrison's presence. Given her profession and her relationship to the deceased, her presence creates an inherent intimidation factor that may prejudice these proceedings. Haley almost smiled. Almost. Judge Caldwell removed her glasses. Miss Morrison is an officer of the court and has every right to be present. However, Miss Morrison, I assume you understand that you cannot participate in these proceedings beyond observation? I understand completely, Your Honor. It was enough. She just needed to be here. Needed them to see her. Needed them to understand what they'd thrown away when they'd abandoned that 3-month-old baby. Patricia Vance called her first witness. The plaintiffs call Sarah Morrison to the stand. Haley watched her mother take the oath, one hand on the Bible, and wondered if she felt anything. Guilt? Shame? Regret? Probably not. Mrs. Morrison, Vance began, her voice sympathetic, carefully modulated. Can you describe your relationship with your father, Robert Morrison? Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She'd always been a good performer. My father and I were very close. I loved him deeply. That's why this is so painful. Haley's pen moved across her legal pad. Lie number 1. When was the last time you saw your father before his death? It had been about 3 years. We'd had a falling out, but I was planning to reconcile with him. I ran out of time. Haley knew the truth. Her grandfather had kept every letter Sarah had sent, stored in a filing cabinet in his study. Haley had found them after he died. The earliest was from 15 years ago, asking for money. The most recent was from 8 months before his death, also asking for money. There was nothing about reconciliation, nothing about love, just requests, demands, promises to visit that never materialized. Can you tell the court about the day you last saw your father? We had lunch. He seemed different, confused. He kept forgetting things, repeating himself. I was worried about him, but I had to go back to California. I should have stayed. If I'd stayed, maybe none of this would have happened. The performance was good. Even Haley had to admit that. Sarah's voice trembled at exactly the right moments. She projected vulnerability without seeming weak, concern without seeming grasping. And can you tell the court about your daughter, Haley? Sarah's eyes flickered toward Haley for just a moment. Haley and I have had a complicated relationship. I was very young when I had her, barely 24. I was overwhelmed, struggling with postpartum depression, and I made the difficult decision to let my parents raise her. I thought it was temporary. I thought I'd get better and bring her home. Lie number 3. But your father prevented that? He convinced me that Haley was better off with them, that I wasn't fit to be a mother. Over time, he turned her against me. And then, when he got older and more vulnerable, she took advantage of that. She isolated him from me, from Marcus, and convinced him to leave everything to her. Haley's hand tightened on her pen. The words cut, even though she'd expected them. Even though she knew they were bullshit. David Chen stood for cross-examination. He didn't look angry. He looked sad, which was somehow worse. Mrs. Morrison, you testified that you were close to your father. How many times did you visit him in the last 10 years of his life? Sarah hesitated. It's hard to say exactly. Let me help you. According to Judge Morrison's calendar, which he kept meticulously, you visited him exactly 4 times in 10 years. Twice in 2015, once in 2019, and once in 2022. Does that sound correct? We talked on the phone. According to his phone records, you called him 17 times in 10 years. He called you 43 times. Most of your calls went to voicemail. Is that what you consider a close relationship? Sarah's composure cracked. He was my father. Of course I loved him. Did you love him when you asked him for $50,000 in 2018 to cover your husband's gambling debts? Did you love him when you asked for $30,000 in 2020 for what you called investment opportunities? Marcus and I were going through a difficult time. Did you love him when you missed his 75th birthday party because you were in Vegas? Objection. Patricia Vance was on her feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Chen, tone it down. David nodded, but he'd made his point. The jury— No, not a jury, Haley reminded herself. This was a bench trial. Judge Caldwell had seen it. The cracks in Sarah's story. Mrs. Morrison, you mentioned postpartum depression. Did you seek treatment? It was a different time. People didn't talk about these things. So that's a no? I was struggling. When you placed Haley with your parents, you told them it would be temporary. How long did you intend temporary to be? A few months? Maybe a year? It's been 28 years, Mrs. Morrison. When exactly were you planning to come back for your daughter? Silence. I'll ask again. When were you planning to resume custody of Haley? Things were complicated. Yes or no, Mrs. Morrison? Did you ever, at any point in the last 28 years, make any attempt to regain custody of your daughter? No. The word hung in the air. No. Did you visit regularly? No. Did you send birthday cards? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. No. Did you attend her high school graduation? No. Her college graduation? No. When she was sworn in as a prosecutor 3 years ago, the ceremony was covered by local news. Did you watch? I didn't know. You didn't know, or you didn't care? Objection. Vance was practically shouting now. Your Honor, this is completely out of line. Overruled. Judge Caldwell's voice was cold. The witness's relationship with both the deceased and the primary beneficiary is directly relevant to the question of undue influence. Continue, Mr. Chen. David looked at Sarah for a long moment. You abandoned your daughter when she was 3 months old. You left her with your parents, and you never came back. Not really. And now that your father is dead and has left his estate to the granddaughter he raised, the granddaughter he loved, the granddaughter who was there for him until his last breath, now you show up claiming he was manipulated. Is that correct? My father wasn't himself at the end. Answer the question, Mrs. Morrison. Sarah's perfect facade crumbled. Yes. No further questions. During the recess, Haley stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. She didn't go to the bathroom, didn't check her phone, just stood there, her back against the wall, breathing. David approached with 2 cups of coffee from the machine. He handed her one. You okay? Fine. You're not fine. I'm fine enough. He sipped his coffee, grimaced at the taste. Your grandfather would be proud of you, being here, facing them. Or he'd tell me I'm being stubborn and vindictive. Those two. David smiled. He always said stubbornness was the Morrison family superpower. Haley found herself smiling back. He did say that, didn't he? The smile faded. Do you remember when I was 12? When my mom showed up at the house? David nodded. He'd been there that day, helping her grandfather with some legal paperwork. She stayed for maybe an hour. She told me she'd been thinking about me, that she wanted to be part of my life again. She gave me this cheap bracelet, the kind you buy at a gas station. She told me she loved me. I remember. I wore that bracelet for 3 months, every single day. I thought maybe— Haley's voice caught. I thought maybe this time would be different. That she'd come back. That she'd call. She didn't. She didn't. Haley took a long drink of the terrible coffee. Grandpa found me crying in my room one night. The clasp on the bracelet had broken. I thought it was a sign, that even this cheap thing she'd given me couldn't last. What did he do? He fixed the bracelet, took it to a jeweler, had them put on a real clasp, gold-plated. He gave it back to me and said, "Sometimes the things we're given are broken, but that doesn't mean we can't make them into something better." David's eyes were wet. That sounds like Robert. I stopped wearing the bracelet a week later, not because it broke again, but because I realized I didn't need it. Didn't need her. I had him. I had Grandma. I had everything that mattered. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Court's resuming. Haley straightened her jacket. Let's finish this. Marcus Thompson took the stand next. He was 55, had played professional hockey for 6 years before a knee injury ended his career. He'd parlayed his minor fame into a series of failed business ventures, financed largely by Sarah's periodic requests to her father. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, kept tugging at the collar. Patricia Vance led him through his testimony. His story was simpler than Sarah's. He'd never really known Robert Morrison, had met him maybe a dozen times over years, but he was concerned about his stepdaughter's influence over the old man. Stepdaughter? David repeated during cross-examination. Mr. Thompson, did you ever legally adopt Haley? No, but did you ever live with her? Sarah's parents were taken care of. Did you ever pay child support? I wasn't legally obligated. Did you ever send her birthday presents? Marcus shifted in his seat. Look, I was young. I had a career. Sarah and I weren't even together when Haley was born. We reconnected years later. So your answer is no? My answer is, it's complicated. Let me simplify it for you. You met Sarah at a bar in 1996. You had a brief relationship. She got pregnant. You told her to handle it. Those were your words, according to Sarah's own deposition, and you left. Is that correct? I was 27 years old. Is that correct? Yes. You never met Haley until she was 16 years old. Is that correct? Yes. And that meeting occurred because… Marcus looked down. Sarah thought we should try to reconnect. Thought maybe if Haley saw us together as a family, she'd come live with us. And did she? No. Why not? She said, Marcus's voice dropped. She said we weren't her family. That Robert and Helen were her family. That we were strangers. Were you hurt by that? Of course I was hurt. Hurt enough to try again, to keep reaching out, to build a relationship with your daughter. Silence. Mr. Thompson, after that meeting when Haley was 16, how many times did you attempt to contact her? I don't remember exactly. According to Haley's testimony, which we'll hear shortly, the answer is 0. You never called, never wrote, never showed up. Is she lying? No. So when you testify that you are concerned about your stepdaughter's influence over Robert Morrison, what you really mean is you're concerned that a man you barely knew left his estate to his granddaughter instead of to your wife, who might share that inheritance with you. Is that correct? That's not fair. Answer the question. We needed that money. I'll take that as a yes. David returned to his seat. No further questions. The afternoon dragged on. Patricia Vance called a series of witnesses, neighbors who testified they'd seen Haley visiting her grandfather frequently in his last year, a home health aide who said Judge Morrison sometimes seemed confused, a financial advisor who'd helped Robert Morrison restructure his assets 2 years before his death. David dismantled each testimony methodically. The neighbors confirmed that Haley's visits made Robert happy, that he seemed more alert and engaged when she was there. The health aide admitted under cross-examination that Robert's confusion was mild and intermittent, consistent with normal aging, and that he'd been evaluated by 2 neurologists who found no evidence of dementia or incapacity. The financial advisor testified that Robert had been completely lucid when making his estate decisions, that he'd understood exactly what he was doing, and that he'd specifically asked to ensure Sarah couldn't contest the will. Did Judge Morrison give a reason for disinheriting his daughter? David asked. The financial advisor, a gray-haired man named Thomas Sterling, nodded. He said, and I'm quoting directly from my notes, Sarah stopped being my daughter the day she walked away from Haley. Haley is my legacy. She's the one who stayed. She's the one who cared. She's earned everything I have to give." The courtroom was silent. Patricia Vance stood for redirect. "Mr. Sterling, isn't it possible that Judge Morrison was being influenced by his granddaughter when he made these statements?" "No." "How can you be certain?" "Because I asked him that directly. I said, 'Judge Morrison, are you making this decision because of anything Haley has said or done?' And he laughed. He said, 'Tom, Haley doesn't know I'm doing this. She'd probably try to talk me out of it if she did. She's too damn noble for her own good, just like her grandmother was.' Then he got serious. He said, 'I'm doing this because it's right, because actions matter more than biology, because love is what you do, not what you feel.'" Vance tried a few more questions, but the damage was done. Thomas Sterling's testimony was unshakable. Finally, Judge Caldwell called for Haley to testify. Haley had been waiting for this moment, dreading it and needing it in equal measure. She walked to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. David began gently. "Haley, can you tell the court about your childhood? She could do this. She'd prosecuted murderers, rapists, monsters who preyed on the vulnerable. She could tell her own story. I lived with my grandparents from the time I was 3 months old until I graduated from college. They raised me, fed me, clothed me, loved me. They were my parents in every way that mattered. Did you have a relationship with your biological parents? No. My mother visited occasionally when I was young, but the visits stopped when I was around 12 or 13. I met my father once when I was 16. It didn't go well." "Did you know your grandfather intended to leave you his estate?" "No, he never discussed it with me. When David called to tell me about the will, I was shocked." "Did you ever ask your grandfather to disinherit your mother?" "Never. I never discussed his estate planning with him at all." "Why not?" Haley looked at Judge Caldwell, then at the gallery where reporters were taking notes. Finally, she let herself look at her mother. "Because I didn't care about his money. I cared about him. He was my grandfather, my mentor, my best friend after Grandma died. The idea that I spent time with him, that I took care of him because I wanted his money?" Her voice broke. She took a breath, steadied herself. "It's obscene." David nodded. "Tell us about your grandmother's death." This was the hard part. "I was 18, just started college. Grandma had a stroke. Sudden, massive. She died 2 days later." Haley's hands were shaking. She gripped the armrest of the witness chair. Grandpa was devastated. They'd been married for 45 years. He told me once that losing her was like losing half of himself. "How did you help him?" "I came home every weekend, called him every night. We'd have dinner together, watch old movies, talk about Grandma, about law. He'd been a judge, and I was thinking about law school. He taught me to play chess. I taught him to use email, though he never really got the hang of it." A few people in the gallery laughed softly. Even Judge Caldwell smiled. "When did you decide to become a prosecutor?" "Grandpa suggested it. I'd been thinking about corporate law, better money, more stability. But he said, 'Haley, you've got a fire in you. Don't waste it on contract negotiations. Use it to protect people who can't protect themselves.' So I did." "Did he support you through law school?" "Yes. He paid my tuition, bought my books, let me live with him rent-free. I tried to pay him back after I got my first job, but he wouldn't hear of it. He said the money was an investment in justice, and the return was watching me succeed." David paused, let the words settle. "Tell us about his last year." Haley closed her eyes, opened them. "He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months ago, stage 4. The doctors said he had 6 to 9 months. He lived for 12. He was so brave. He didn't want to go into hospice, wanted to stay in his house, so I took a leave of absence from work and moved in with him. I became his caregiver, managed his medications, helped him bathe, sat with him during the bad nights when the pain was so awful he couldn't sleep. Did your mother visit during this time? No. Did she call? Twice. Once to ask how he was doing, once to ask if she should come visit. He told her not to bother, that he didn't want to see her. How did she respond? She said okay and hung up. Sarah was crying now, but Haley didn't care. These were the facts, the truth. 3 days before he died, Grandpa told me he loved me. He said I'd been the best part of his life, that raising me had been his and Grandma's greatest joy. He said, Haley's voice cracked again. She forced herself to continue. He said, you were never abandoned, sweetheart. You were chosen, and we chose you every single day. The courtroom was absolutely silent. He died at home, in his own bed, with me holding his hand. He wasn't afraid. He said he was going to see Grandma again, and that made him happy. Tears were streaming down Haley's face now. And then, he was gone. David let the moment breathe. Finally, did you know he'd left you everything? Not until a week after the funeral. I thought maybe he'd left me the house, some savings to help with my loans. I had no idea about the full extent of his estate. $3 million, his home, and his investment portfolio. What was your reaction? I cried. Not because of the money, because it meant he'd trusted me with his legacy, because he'd seen me as his heir, not just his granddaughter. Because even after death, he was taking care of me. Thank you, Haley. No further questions. Patricia Vance approached for cross-examination. She was less gentle. Miss Morrison, you testified that you never discussed your grandfather's estate planning with him, but you also testified that you lived with him during his final year. Are you telling this court that the subject never came up? That's correct. Never? Not once? You spent 12 months as his caregiver, and the subject of his will never arose? He mentioned once that he'd updated his will and that everything was in order. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my business. How convenient. Objection, David said. Argumentative. Sustained. Vance tried another angle. You took a leave of absence from your job to care for your grandfather? That must have been financially difficult. It was. Did your grandfather offer to compensate you? He tried. I refused. Why? Because he was my grandfather. I didn't need to be paid to take care of him. But you were aware that there would be an inheritance, that your sacrifice would be rewarded? Haley's eyes flashed. I was aware that my grandfather was dying. That's all I was thinking about. Not money, not inheritance. The fact that you can't imagine someone caring for a dying relative without a financial motive says more about you than it does about me. Objection! Vance's face was red. Your Honor. Overruled. You asked the question, counsel. Miss Morrison is entitled to answer it. Vance tried a few more questions, but Haley was unshakable. Finally, she gave up. No further questions. Judge Caldwell called for closing arguments. Conclusion. David Chen stood and buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at the judge, then at Sarah and Marcus, then back to the judge. Your Honor, this case is simple. A man left his estate to his granddaughter. The granddaughter who raised him, who cared for him, who was present in his life from birth until death. His biological daughter, who abandoned her own child and maintained virtually no relationship with her father for decades, now claims he wasn't competent to make this decision. She offers no medical evidence of incompetence, no testimony from doctors or neurologists, just speculation and innuendo. But let's talk about what we do have evidence of. We have evidence that Sarah Morrison visited her father 4 times in 10 years. We have evidence that she asked him for money repeatedly. We have evidence that she never made any meaningful effort to maintain a relationship with either her father or her daughter. We have evidence that when Robert Morrison was dying, when he needed family most, Sarah wasn't there. Haley was. The plaintiffs want you to believe that Haley manipulated her grandfather, But the evidence shows something very different. It shows a young woman who honored her grandparents by living a life they could be proud of, who sacrificed her own career and financial security to care for a dying man, who asked for nothing and gave everything. Robert Morrison wasn't confused. He wasn't incompetent. He was heartbroken. Heartbroken that his daughter had abandoned her child. Heartbroken that she only came around when she needed money. And in his final act, he chose to leave his legacy to someone who had earned it, not through manipulation, but through love. This will should stand, not because Haley needs the money. She's proven she doesn't, but because it represents something more important than dollars and cents. It represents the fundamental truth that family isn't about biology. It's about presence. It's about showing up. It's about love demonstrated through action, not words. Judge Morrison showed up for Haley every day of her life. She showed up for him when it mattered most. Sarah Morrison didn't. That's not Haley's fault. That's Sarah's choice. And choices have consequences. We ask that you uphold Judge Morrison's will. Let his final wishes be honored. Let this young woman, who has already lost so much, keep what her grandfather wanted her to have. Thank you. Patricia Vance stood for the plaintiffs. Her argument was what Haley expected. Questions about Robert's mental state, suggestions that Haley had isolated him, implications of elder abuse. It was weak, and Vance knew it. Judge Caldwell called a recess to consider her ruling. Haley sat in the hallway, David beside her. Whatever happens, your grandfather would be proud of you. I know. 30 minutes later, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Caldwell looked tired. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony presented in this case. The question before this court is whether Robert Morrison's last will and testament should be overturned on grounds of undue influence or mental incapacity. The burden of proof in such cases rests with the plaintiffs. They must demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that Judge Morrison was either mentally incapable of understanding his actions or that he was unduly influenced by the primary beneficiary. The plaintiffs have failed to meet this burden. There is no medical evidence of cognitive decline. Judge Morrison was evaluated by 2 neurologists in the final year of his life. Both found him to be of sound mind. His financial advisor testified that Judge Morrison understood exactly what he was doing when he structured his estate plan. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Morrison spoke clearly and rationally about his decisions. As to the question of undue influence, I find no evidence that Haley manipulated or coerced her grandfather. The evidence shows she was his caregiver, yes, that she spent significant time with him, yes, but the evidence also shows that their relationship was loving, mutual, and based on a lifetime of connection. Judge Morrison's own words, as recorded by his financial advisor, make clear that his decision to leave his estate to his granddaughter was voluntary and considered. I want to address something else, something that's been implicit in this case, but needs to be said explicitly. The plaintiffs seem to believe that biological relationship entitles them to inheritance, regardless of their actions or involvement in the deceased's life. The law does not support this position. Neither does basic human decency. Sarah Morrison abandoned her daughter as an infant. She maintained virtually no relationship with her father in his final decades. She was absent when he was dying. And now she seeks to profit from his death, claiming that blood entitles her to his estate? This court rejects that claim emphatically. Family is not merely biology. Family is presence. Family is care. Family is showing up, day after day, year after year. Haley Morrison was Robert Morrison's family in every sense that matters. She earned this inheritance through 3 decades of love and devotion. The will is upheld. All costs are to be borne by the plaintiffs. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Haley sat very still. David was hugging her, saying something, but she couldn't hear him over the rushing in her ears. She'd won. But as she looked at her mother, Sarah was gathering her things, her face blotchy and tear-stained. Haley didn't feel victorious. She felt empty. Sarah walked past her without looking at her. Marcus followed, his hand on Sarah's back. They were almost to the door when Haley heard herself speak. "Mom?" Sarah stopped, turned. For a moment, they just looked at each other. 28 years of absence hanging in the air between them. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I'm sorry for all of it. For leaving you, for not being there, for—" her voice broke, "for failing you. I don't need your apology. I needed a mother. 30 years ago. That's when I needed you. I know. Do you? Do you really? Because I don't think you do. I don't think you understand what it was like to grow up knowing my own mother didn't want me. To see other kids with their parents and wonder what was so wrong with me that you couldn't stay? You weren't. There was nothing wrong with you. Then why did you leave?" Sarah opened her mouth, closed it. "I was scared. I was young and scared, and I didn't know how to be a mother. So you just didn't. You just walked away and let someone else do it. I thought, you thought what? That I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't care? That Grandpa and Grandma could just replace you?" Haley's voice was rising. "They did, eventually. They loved me so much that I stopped missing you. Do you understand that? They loved the empty space you left until it wasn't empty anymore. They made me whole. Haley. And now they're gone, both of them. And I have this inheritance, this house, this money. Do you know what I'd give to trade it all for one more day with Grandpa? One more conversation, one more chess game?" Sarah was crying openly now. "I know I can't fix this. I know I can't undo 30 years. But maybe we could try. Maybe it's not too late to—" "It is too late." Haley's voice was very calm. "It's been too late for a very long time. I don't need a mother anymore. I'm 28 years old. I've built a life, a career, an identity that has nothing to do with you. And I'm fine with that. I'm more than fine. I'm successful and happy and loved by people who chose to be in my life. I want to choose. You had 30 decades to choose me. You didn't. You chose yourself, your freedom, your life. And that's fine. That was your right. But now you don't get to choose this. You don't get to show up after 30 decades and claim a relationship that never existed." Haley picked up her briefcase. "I won't stop you from leaving. I won't report you for trying to contest the will. That's your legal right, even if it was morally bankrupt. But I am asking you to leave me alone. Don't call, don't write, don't show up at my office or my home. We're strangers, Sarah. Let's keep it that way." Sarah's face crumpled. "Please, please, Haley. I know I don't deserve it, but please." "You're right. You don't deserve it." Haley walked past her, toward the door. She paused, looked back one more time. Grandpa used to say that people show you who they are through their actions, not their words. You showed me who you were when I was 3 months old. Everything since then has just been confirmation. She left the courtroom without looking back. Outside, the October air was crisp and cool. Portland was beautiful this time of year. The leaves turning gold and red, the sky that particular shade of blue that made everything feel possible. David caught up with her on the courthouse steps. "That was hard." "Yeah." "You—" Haley thought about it. Really thought about it. "I am," she said, and realized it was true. "I really am." "What are you going to do now?" "Go back to work. I've got a sexual assault case that needs my attention. The victim is 17, scared out of her mind, and she needs a prosecutor who will fight for her." "And the inheritance?" Haley looked at the courthouse behind her. Her grandfather had worked here for 30 years. had dispensed justice from the bench with wisdom and compassion and an unwavering belief in the law. I'm going to use it the way Grandpa would want. I'm going to set up a scholarship fund for law students from non-traditional families, kids being raised by grandparents, foster kids, anyone who's building a family from something other than biology. I'm going to call it the Robert and Helen Morrison Scholarship for Legal Excellence. David smiled. He'd love that. I know. They stood there for a moment, watching people come and go from the courthouse. Lawyers in expensive suits, defendants looking scared, families torn apart by divorce or custody battles or inheritance disputes. David? Yeah? Thank you. For everything, for being there today. For being there for Grandpa. For being there for me. Your family, Haley. That's what family does. She hugged him. He smelled like coffee and Old Spice, the same cologne her grandfather had worn. When she pulled back, she was crying. Happy tears, sad tears, complicated tears that didn't have a name. I need to go. I need to get back to work. Go. I'll handle the paperwork. We'll talk this week about the estate settlement. Haley walked to her car, a sensible Honda Civic that she'd bought used 3 years ago. The leather briefcase sat in the passenger seat, worn and familiar. She started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove back to the district attorney's office. There was work to do. Epilogue. 5 years later, the confirmation hearing was packed. Senators, reporters, advocates, and curious citizens filled every seat in the chamber. Haley Morrison sat at the witness table, her hands folded in front of her. At 33, she'd prosecuted over 100 cases, won a landmark sexual assault case that changed state precedent on consent, and built a reputation as one of the most effective prosecutors in Oregon. Now she was being considered for a judicial appointment, the same circuit court where her grandfather had served for 3 decades. Senator Patricia Richmond, chair of the Judiciary Committee, smiled at her. Miss Morrison, or should I say future Judge Morrison, you've had a remarkable career, but I'd like to ask you about something personal, if I may. Of course. 5 years ago, you were involved in a high-profile inheritance dispute. Your biological parents attempted to contest your grandfather's will. Can you tell us how that experience shaped your understanding of justice? Haley had known this question was coming. She'd prepared an answer. But sitting there, under the lights, with the weight of her grandfather's legacy on her shoulders, she decided to tell the truth instead. That case taught me that justice isn't just about the law. It's about recognizing what's right, even when it's complicated, even when it hurts. My grandfather could have divided his estate equally. He could have given my mother a half out of obligation, out of some sense that biology creates entitlement. Instead, he made a different choice. He recognized that love is demonstrated through actions, not DNA. That family is built through presence, through sacrifice, through showing up day after day, year after year. As a prosecutor, I've seen countless cases where the letter of the law conflicts with the spirit of justice, where following procedure means ignoring the human cost. I've learned that good law requires wisdom, compassion, and the courage to look beyond what's easy to what's right. If confirmed, I will bring that perspective to the bench. I will follow the law faithfully, but I will never forget that behind every case are real people with real pain and real hope for justice. Senator Richmond nodded. Thank you. I have no further questions. The vote was unanimous. 3 weeks later, Haley stood in the same courtroom where she'd faced her parents 5 years earlier. This time, she wore judge's robes. David Chen was there, crying openly. So were dozens of her colleagues from the DA's office, defense attorneys who respected her fairness, and victims she'd fought for over the years. Judge Patricia Caldwell, now semi-retired, administered the oath of office. Do you solemnly swear to administer justice without respect to persons and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon you as a circuit court judge according to the best of your abilities and understanding, agreeable to the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state? I do. The gavel passed from Caldwell's hands to Haley's. It was wooden, worn smooth by decades of use, her grandfather's gavel. Caldwell had saved it for her. "Your grandfather used this to deliver over 10,000 rulings," Caldwell said softly. He believed that every case mattered. Every person who walked into his courtroom deserved dignity, fairness, and the full weight of the law applied with wisdom. He was the finest judge I ever knew. "I'll honor it," Haley promised. "I'll honor him." The reception was held at the courthouse. Haley made her way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, feeling overwhelmed and grateful and terrified, all at once. Near the end of the evening, she found herself standing alone in the hallway outside the courtroom. Through the window, she could see the parking lot where she'd confronted her mother 5 years ago. She'd wondered if Sarah would try to reach out after she heard about the judicial appointment. She hadn't. Marcus had sent a brief email. "Congratulations on your achievement." Nothing more. She'd deleted it without responding. She didn't hate them anymore. She didn't feel anything for them, really. They were strangers who happened to share her DNA. They had no claim on her life, her success, or her future. "Haley?" She turned. David stood there, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You disappeared on us." "Just needed a minute." He handed her a glass. "To Judge Haley Chen Morrison, your grandparents would be so damn proud." They clinked glasses. "David, can I tell you something?" "Always." "I used to have this recurring dream. I'm a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, and I'm waiting at the window for my mom to come back. I watch every car that drives by, convinced that this time she'll come. But she never does. The dream always ends with me standing at that window waiting." That's heartbreaking. It was. But I haven't had that dream in 5 years. Not since the trial. Not since I told her I didn't need her anymore. Haley looked at her reflection in the window. I think that little girl finally stopped waiting. She finally understood that the people who were supposed to come back weren't coming, and that she was going to be okay anyway. More than okay. More than okay, Haley agreed. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I've been thinking about writing a book," Haley said, "about family law, about how the legal system needs to do better at recognizing that biology doesn't equal family, that we need to protect the relationships that actually matter, not just the ones that exist on paper. Your grandfather always said you'd end up changing the law." "He did?" "He told me once that you had the mind of a prosecutor and the heart of an advocate, that you wouldn't be satisfied just enforcing the law, you'd want to make it better." Haley felt tears prick her eyes. "I miss him. I know. I wish he could see this, see me in these robes, see that everything he and Grandma did, all the years they spent raising me, mattered. He knows. Wherever he is, he knows." Haley finished her champagne. "I should get back. I've got my first docket on Monday, 27 cases, including a custody dispute that's going to be brutal. You ready?" She thought about everything that had led her here. The abandonment, the love, the loss, the trial, the inheritance. Every moment of pain and joy and growth. She thought about her grandfather's words. "You were never abandoned. You were chosen, and we chose you every single day." "I'm ready," she said. 1 year later, the case that came across Haley's desk in late October should have been routine. A custody dispute, mother versus father, both claiming to be the better parent, both wanting sole custody of their 8-year-old daughter. But as Haley read the case file, something about it nagged at her. The mother, Jessica Torres, had left her daughter with her parents for a few months 3 years ago, while she dealt with substance abuse issues. Those few months had stretched into 3 years. Now Jessica was clean, employed, and wanted her daughter back. The father, Daniel Torres, had been absent for most of the child's life. He'd paid child support sporadically, visited rarely, but when Jessica went to rehab, he hadn't stepped up. The grandparents had. And now the grandparents, Rosa and Miguel Santos, were petitioning for custody. They'd raised their granddaughter. They'd been there for every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment, every nightmare and triumph, and ordinary Tuesday. But they weren't the biological parents. Under Oregon law, they had limited standing. Haley scheduled a hearing. The courtroom was tense. Jessica Torres looked nervous but determined. Daniel Torres looked bored. Rosa Santos held her husband's hand and looked terrified. Haley listened to the arguments. Jessica's attorney painted a picture of a woman who'd made mistakes but was now ready to be a mother. Daniel's attorney argued that his client was the biological father and deserved a chance. The Santos' attorney argued for the status quo, the stable, loving home they'd provided. All three attorneys cited precedent, case law, statutes. None of them talked about what the little girl, Sophia, wanted or needed. Haley called a recess. She asked to meet with Sophia in chambers, with a child advocate present. Sophia was small for 8, with dark curly hair and her grandmother's eyes. She sat in the big leather chair and looked around with wide-eyed wonder. "Have you ever been in a judge's office before?" "No, ma'am." "You can call me Judge Haley, and you're not in trouble, okay? I just want to talk to you about where you want to live." Sophia's face clouded. "I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings." "I know, but this is important. Your feelings are important. Mama Jessica says she's better now, that she wants me to come live with her. How do you feel about that?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I don't really know her anymore. She comes to visit sometimes, and she's nice, but she's not my mom. Not really. Grammy is my mom. She is the one who makes my lunch and helps with my homework and comes to my soccer games. What about your father?" "I don't really know him either. He sends birthday cards sometimes." Haley's heart ached. If you could choose anywhere to live, where would it be? "With Grammy and Grampy. That's my home. That's where my room is and my toys and my cat. That's where I feel safe." "Thank you, Sophia. You're very brave to tell me the truth." Back in the courtroom, Haley delivered her ruling. "I've reviewed the case law, and I understand the legal precedent that favors biological parents. However, I've also taken the time to speak with Sophia, whose wishes and best interests must be paramount in this decision. Ms. Torres, I commend you for your recovery. I truly do. Overcoming addiction is one of the hardest things a person can do. But recovery doesn't erase 3 years of absence. It doesn't automatically rebuild a bond with a child who has had to learn to live without you. Mr. Torres, you've been largely absent from Sophia's life by choice. Paying sporadic child support is not the same as being a father. It's the bare minimum of legal obligation. Mr. and Mrs. Santos, you have done what parents do. You've shown up. You've been consistent. You've provided stability and love and safety. And Sophia knows that. She feels it. The law often treats biological parents as having an inherent right to their children. But I believe the law must evolve to recognize a more fundamental truth. Children have a right to stability, safety, and love. They have a right to relationships with the adults who have actually parented them. Therefore, I am granting full custody to Rosa and Miguel Santos. Ms. Torres and Mr. Torres will be granted supervised visitation rights, with the possibility of increased visitation if they demonstrate consistent involvement over the next year. I want to be clear about my reasoning, because I intend to write a full opinion on this case that I hope will influence future custody decisions in the state. Biology creates obligation, but it doesn't create family. Family is created through action, through presence, through the daily work of love. The law should protect those relationships, not undermine them in favor of genetic connection alone. Sophia deserves to live with the people who have been her true parents. That's justice. The gavel fell. Rosa Santos collapsed into her husband's arms, crying. Sophia, who'd been sitting in the gallery with the victim's advocate, ran to her grandparents. Jessica Torres sat very still, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, She stood and walked over to where Rosa was holding Sophia. "Thank you," Jessica said quietly, "for taking care of her, for loving her when I couldn't." Rosa looked at her daughter with complicated eyes. Love and disappointment and hope all tangled together. "She's always going to need her mother. When you're ready, really ready, we'll be here. But you need to earn that place in her life. You understand?" "I understand." It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a real one. After the courtroom cleared, David Chen appeared in the doorway. "You know that ruling is going to be controversial." "I know. It might get appealed. Let it be appealed. Let the state Supreme Court rule on whether children have a right to stability and whether caregiving grandparents should have standing equal to absentee biological parents. I'll welcome that fight." David smiled. "Your grandfather would say you're being stubborn. And you'd tell him stubbornness is the Morrison family superpower." "That I would." Haley looked around her chambers, at the law books lining the shelves, the framed photos of her grandparents, and the wooden gavel that had delivered justice for 4 decades. "I'm writing the full opinion tonight. I want it to be comprehensive. I want it to change the conversation about what family means, about how we protect children, about how the law served justice instead of just precedent." "It'll be good," David said. "It'll be important." "I hope so." That night, Haley sat at her grandfather's old desk, now her desk, and wrote. She wrote about Sophia, about herself, about every child who'd ever been caught between biology and love. She wrote about how the law had failed to evolve with society's understanding of family. She wrote about grandparents who raised grandchildren, about foster parents who loved kids who weren't legally theirs, about chosen families that were stronger than blood. She wrote for 12 hours straight. When she finished, the sun was rising over Portland. The opinion was 47 pages long. It cited precedent from a dozen states, legal scholarship on child welfare, and psychological research on attachment and development. But it also told stories, human stories, real stories. It told Sophia's story, and it told hers. The opinion began with a quote from her grandfather's journals, which she'd found in his study after he died. "The law is not merely a system of rules. It is a framework for justice, which must evolve as our understanding of justice evolves. We once believed that biology created unbreakable bonds and inherent rights. We now understand that love creates bonds, that presence creates rights, and that the best interests of children must outweigh the claims of adults, even their biological parents. The law must protect what is real, not what we imagine should be real. It must protect relationships built through action, not assumptions built on genetics." Haley titled her opinion, "In the Matter of St. a Minor, a New Framework for Family Recognition." It was published 3 weeks later. Within a month, it was being cited in custody cases across Oregon. Within 6 months, legal scholars were writing about it. Within a year, it had been cited in decisions in Washington, California, and Colorado. The change was slow. The law always is. But it was changed nonetheless. 5 years after that, on the 10th anniversary of her grandfather's death, Haley visited his grave. Beside him, her grandmother's headstone stood, the two of them together even in death. She brought flowers. Sunflowers, his favorite. "Hey, Grandpa," she said, kneeling in the grass. "I hope you're proud of me. I hope I'm doing right by your legacy." The cemetery was quiet, just birds and wind and the distant sound of traffic. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being chosen instead of abandoned, about love being what you do, not what you feel. I've been trying to build a career on that principle, on the idea that the law should protect real relationships, not just legal ones." She touched the headstone. "I'm 38 now. Can you believe it? Same age you were when you and Grandma took me in. I understand now what that must have been like. To be at a point in your life where you thought you were done raising children, and then suddenly you had a 3-month-old baby. You could have said no. You could have told Mom to figure it out. But you didn't. You chose me." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I wish you could see what that choice became. I wish you could see the lives I've been able to touch because you gave me stability and love and a model of what family really means. She stood, brushed grass from her knees. I'm working on a book. It's called Chosen, Redefining Family in American Law. It's going to be controversial. Some people are going to hate it. But I think it's going to help a lot of people too. Kids in situations like mine, grandparents who've stepped up, foster families who love children the system says aren't really theirs. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees. I'm not alone, by the way. In case you're wondering, I met someone. His name is Marcus. I know, ironic, right? Different Marcus. Better Marcus. He's a public defender. We fight all the time about cases, but we respect each other. He gets it. He gets why this work matters. She smiled. He asked me to marry him last week. I said yes. I wish you could walk me down the aisle. I wish Grandma could help me pick out a dress. But I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to be happy. Because that's what you taught me. To build a life worth living, even when the people you love are gone. She placed the sunflowers at the base of the headstone. Thank you. For everything. For choosing me. For showing me what family really means. For giving me a foundation strong enough to build a life on. She turned to leave, then stopped. On the headstone, below her grandfather's name and dates, was an inscription she'd chosen. Robert Morrison, judge, grandfather, father. He chose love every day. And below her grandmother's name, Helen Chen Morrison, teacher, grandmother, mother. She made everyone feel chosen. Haley walked back to her car. She had a docket to review, a wedding to plan, a book to write, and a justice system to improve. She had work to do. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. The ST opinion just got cited by the Ninth Circuit. Your grandfather would be so proud. She smiled. Typed back. He already knew. That's the thing about being chosen. The pride is built in. She started the car and drove toward the courthouse, toward her chambers, toward the work that her grandparents had prepared her for without ever knowing that's what they were doing. They'd just been loving her, raising her, choosing her, every single day. And in the end, that had made all the difference. Moral: family isn't blood, it's presence. It's showing up when it's hard. It's loving someone when they can't love themselves. It's choosing, every day, to stay. Biology creates obligation. Love creates family. And justice, real justice, must recognize the difference.